Hi, I'm Martin Edwards.
And I'm Ralph Hayward.
And we're both advisors at the student advice team in the Students' Union. And we're here to provide help and advice to students on a variety of different topics, including housing, academic matters, and student finance. And today, we're going to be talking about the funding that's available for students doing certain healthcare courses, and also for students who have disabilities and the funding that might be available to them. So, Ralph, what sort of additional funding is available to healthcare students, and which healthcare students can get it?
Well, that is always one of those things, because healthcare students sounds like such a simple thing to work through, and it isn't always. The history lesson is if it used to be funded by the NHS through a different funding scheme before 2016, then you'll be eligible for the new stuff. But that's just me remembering the days when I was young and taking the Brontosaur for a walk. At staffs at any rate, the courses eligible for the extra healthcare funding are all types of nursing, midwifery, paramedic science. Have I missed anything?
I think there's also operating department practice as well.
Of course, yes, ODP. Yes, I'm having a senior moment. Yes, definitely do not want our operating department practitioners missing out on this. And it is very handy if a student can get it, because it can be an extra sack load of cash, and what's even better, non-repayable cash. The good old word grant enters the vocabulary. Oh, I remember the days when there were student grants. Well, if you're a healthcare student, they're back.
And unlike what our dear Prime Minister said, it isn't a bursary. The main source of funding is a learning support grant. And that is basically given to students to support their funding. Now, have I got that terminology right? It's the Learning Support Fund, isn't it?
It's the Learning Support Fund. It's
a training
grant.
Training
grant.
You see, even advisors get confused.
Oh, and who can blame us? There have been so many of these systems. But at least the figures are easy. You qualify for an NHS training grant. Hey presto, there's £5,000 a year. You have children under the age of 15 or 17 if they have special educational needs. Hey presto, there's another £2,000. At the moment, mental health nursing is a shortage subject. There's another 1,000, and they can all stack up. So at least the mathematics isn't enough to give us some nightmares.
That's very true. And of course, a lot of nursing students will be going out on placement, and they will have accommodation and transport costs. And can they get any help with that?
Well, that all depends on where the placement is. I mean, temporary accommodation, that's a yes. NHS Business Services Authority, accommodation grants. Travel. You can only claim for travel in excess of your travel to your teaching location. So I don't know if you live in Stafford, but your nursing course is in Stoke, and your placement is in Crewe. You can claim for the difference between travel to Stoke and travel to Crewe. You live in Stafford, your teaching's in Stoke, your placement's at Stafford Hospital, you're not going to be able to get a bean for the bus fare.
But one of the things that if you are eligible to claim travel expenses, that's normally through the student finance system, but they disregard the first few £100 of that, don't they? I forget the exact amount. But the main thing that you do need to know from that is that the NHS Learning Support Fund makes up the difference. So you're not going to be out of pocket.
Yeah, the only way you'll be out of pocket is it's a refund system. If you rock up expecting them to pay up front, oh dear, that can be a cash flow problem. Definitely a refund system unless I've completely misunderstood the rules.
Yes, fill out your travel expense forms. The other thing that might also be of use to people is when we've talked in previous podcasts about students experiencing financial hardship, and the university itself has a student success support fund for students in hardship. But students who are on certain NHS courses, as we just previously mentioned, have an additional layer of hardship support, don't they?
Oh, they do indeed, the good old exceptional support fund, which has been there right back to the time when there was no grey in my beard. It's a really long-term thing. It's always been the same rough system. Although it's there, and although it can be quite a lot of money, it looks at real needs, but you always have to try the university's version first. It's only if that can't help or can't help enough that you then get university stamp on a form that says, we've done what we can, and only then can you head to the exceptional support fund.
So there is quite a lot of support for students who are doing nursing, midwifery, operating department practice, and paramedic science. In truth, the paramedic science was very often the Cinderella service where funding was concerned in the past, so this is quite handy for them.
Oh, heavens, yes. They are still a little bit of a Cinderella because they're the only one of those courses that's not an exception to the previous study rules. Nursing, operating department practice, it doesn't matter if you already have an undergraduate degree, a master's, a doctorate, there's no previous study rules, you can get the funding. Paramedic Science, I'm afraid, is not one of those courses. But apart from that, it's there for the paramedics.
Which is good to know.
Oh, heavens, yes.
So I think we've actually covered quite a lot of ground there with regards to nursing students, healthcare students. There isn't the same sort of support for social work students, though, is there?
Sadly not, particularly not in their first year. There is a bursary, but it's an entirely different one. Nothing in the first year. You can get up to, I believe it's £5,500, again as a grant, in years 2 and 3, but there's a capped number of those bursaries. Not every social work student ends up getting a social work bursary. Each university will have its own tie breaks. Where check with the school. The last I heard, the Staffordshire University tie break was attendance and academic performance in your first year. So if you want a £5,000 bursary as a social work student in years 2 and 3, work your socks off in your first year.
So in essence, basically, if you're a social work student, you shouldn't rely on getting a bursary. You should regard that as a bonus for all that hard work you've put in.
Oh, yes. Of course, I wouldn't expect a social work student to be doing anything other than working their socks off. I suspect I've just stated officially the blooming obvious.
Absolutely. So that leads us on to people who might be recipients of healthcare rather than providing it. And of course, we're talking about the population of students who may be coming into higher education with disabilities, which could be physical or mental disabilities. It could be learning disabilities. It does cover a very wide spectrum. So what sources of income are available to such students?
Well, I'm going to start with the bad news and then move on to the support news. Again, history lesson from the chap who had a pet brontosaur. Historically, disabled students, if they got personal independence payment, hey presto, access to the state benefit system despite being full-time students. Recently, that has got a lot trickier. By the time this podcast is aired, in order to be eligible for state benefits as a full-time disabled student in receipt of personal independence payment, you would also have to have been assessed as having limited capability for work status before you started the course. Routes to actually become eligible partway through your course are busily being closed off. I'm studiously non-political, so I'm not going to say what I think of that. I will leave our intelligent viewership to form their own intelligent conclusions. So that's the bad bit. The good bit is that the university can provide quite a lot of support. And if some of that's free, for example, potentially flexibility with assessments, things that have a cost attached, so maybe physical support, note-taking support, dyslexia tuition, there's another part of the Student Finance England grant system, the Disabled Students Allowance, designed to pay for that sort of need.
Yes, and that's one of those grants that seems to be available throughout the entire student life cycle. So you can get it as an undergraduate student, you can get it as a postgraduate student.
Oh, absolutely. And that is one of the things that has improved. Did the bad news? The good news is, historically, postgraduates had a raw deal with it. These days, it's been a very long time since I saw any student whose disabled student's allowance maximum wasn't enough to cover what was assessed. Where I see issues, I don't know how it is with you, but when I see issues, it tends to be someone hasn't realised it's there, hasn't contacted the student inclusion team, someone's having difficulty getting medical evidence of their condition. It's been the administrative things rather than the eligibilities.
I would agree there. And very often, when we're dealing with issues regarding student finance, it's not because someone isn't deserving of it or even on paper eligible for it. It's very often the case is actually proving that they have those particular, qualifying criteria.
Yes, I mean, you hear stories of all sorts of things. Only hearsay, but recently a contact of mine was talking about a university that wouldn't put informal support in place without a formal diagnosis. I've never seen staffs pull that particular trick. If a medical practitioner's letter will say to staffs, we're not exactly sure what the diagnosis is yet, but it's absolutely clear that this patient has these symptoms with these effects, the university jumps into action. But for the funding, good old government, there's been no such thing as a government that isn't bureaucratic, and good old government wants some sort of paper diagnosis and no mistake.
This is very true. Is there anything else that you can think of that would be of benefit to disabled students?
Well, I mean, it's not directly financial, but being part of our disabled students network at the Students' Union certainly is a source of peer support, enables people to swap experiences, gain informal practice, what's worked with funding, what hasn't. Are you getting the right support compared with mine? Our conditions seem similar. I mean, there's a little bit of risk in that because no two people's disability is identical. So just because Archie is getting this doesn't mean that Zephaniah will get it. They're really minute differences. And it could just be Zephaniah gets this bit because Zephaniah's course is different from Archie's course and Zephaniah's course needs it. So there is an element of risk with that sort of comparison, but Disabled Students Network as social and also expertise sharing support. In danger of blowing our own trumpet, I think the Students' Union is really valuable there.
I would agree with you, and we are talking about support that may not necessarily have a value in the sense that you have money and you pay for it, but there are resources out there that if you had to pay for them would cost you an arm and a leg, but you can get them anyway.
Oh, heavens yes, never pay for the thing you can get free. As long as it's not 5-finger discount, don't shoplift.
Right. And again, of course, the university have the Student Success Support Fund to help students in financial hardship. And that, could include anyone who has sort of got a short-term financial need. And the Students' Union, of course, are always there to help and advise students who find themselves in financial hardship. And we have certain resources as well to help students out in a crisis, such as Food Hub. But I think the best thing we can offer students is basically help and advice and where to go when help is needed. So we very often signpost students to places where they can get the appropriate support if we can't actually provide it.
Oh, absolutely. And you've actually given me one more idea. I'm sorry to barge in on you.
Not at all.
But it was while you were talking about Student Success Fund, it occurred to me that that there's another part of that the university has that historically has been a bit underutilised. People haven't really realised about it, haven't applied in great numbers. And that's the Student Success Experiences Fund. It occurred to me just as you were talking that this could be incredibly useful for students with, for example, mobility issues, the cost for whom of research trips, course enhancing trips might otherwise be prohibitive, because if they're elective, the central government funding might well not pay for it. But that sort of course and career enhancement is exactly what the Student Success Experiences Fund is for. So just off the cuff, I am wondering whether that might be of particular usefulness to students with disabilities.
It's certainly worth exploring. And also the alumni bursaries that sometimes are available. These are basically funds of money that have been set up by ex-students who basically are friends of the university, and they periodically release amounts of money for which students can apply for. I would always look at the university website for that, because these things are in this constant state of flux, and you can't be certain that if a fund is available one year, it's available the next, or if a different fund hasn't suddenly started up. So it is worth keeping an eye on the university's Money Matters pages.
Oh, heavens, yes. The first I heard of the London campus ACH Cresford bursary was when it appeared on the website. I spent too much time locked in my office and not enough time networking that year.
This is very true. I think that at that point we can draw this to a close, and it's a good night from me.
And it's good night from him. Good night.
Good night.